especially after last time I spoke to you, at least on my end, it was a total disaster. My technology didn't link up with yours, and I had all of that stuff, and felt real bad about that. So I'm really happy for an opportunity to come back and be able to connect and talk to you. Cultural diversity is a timely topic. It's also one of those topics that periodically we all have to visit because it's important. And I understand that it's timely, but I'm also assuming that volunteers or CASA program has to also be able to make sure that you revisit cultural diversity from time to time. Is that correct, Tim? Yeah. Okay. Good. So let me kick in and get going. If you have some comments or questions, jot them down towards the end. We'll do that. But also, if I have some questions and you want to chime in, just feel free to unmute yourself and holler, so I'll hear you, or wave or something like that, and we'll have some discussion as well. Also, it's what, 12:15. What's our timeline? Do I need to speak for an hour, day and a half, uh, on into next week? What?
We would listen as long as you would like to speak. We're scheduled to 1:30, but it doesn't mean you have to go all the way up to 1:30. I know questions will be,
Okay.
we're going to have questions. We always ask things. So
Okay, very good. Thank you for that. I want to never tell a former preacher that you can talk as long as you want and we'll just listen, because that's and the emphasis is on the word former, because a former preacher means he doesn't get to preach regularly and is really itching to, and you give him the podium and then he's off and running. But I'll be more responsible today. Culture, for all of us, culture, it's the lens by which we evaluate everything around us, our culture. It's how we evaluate what is proper or improper, how we evaluate what is normal to us or abnormal. And it's through our culture, our own experiences, that we make these kinds of evaluations and judgments. What's interesting to me is that culture is really the driver, as opposed to any set number of rules of how things are supposed to be. What is normal? Who the heck knows? It's driven by each of us. In fact, there's a new buzzword now, and that's called the new normal, because with all of the changes we've had to make with this virus and how we're having to learn to live, like this meeting right here, a Zoom meeting, it's it's a whole new normal, because it's been going on for a while and may go on for quite a while. We just don't know. So culture, according to Vivek Murthy, if you don't recognize that name, he's a former Surgeon General of the United States. I think 17th, a couple of years ago, he was in office. And he recently published a book called Together. And in that book, he states that culture is the bowl in which relationships are formed. So it's in the bowl of culture that we connect with people and establish connections and relationships, which leads me to wonder, I wonder what kind of bowl the United States is, or what kind of bowl is Texas, and how is that different from the United States culture bowl? Or even better yet, South Texas or Victoria. What kind of culture bowl is Victoria? Or Cimarron, subdivision, or Mayfair, or Spring Creek, or the high schools, East, West High School, St. Joseph, Faith Family School. How many culture bowls do we have in this whole area in which we live? And how do they interact with one another, and how do they impact us? I grew up as a kid out of this country. I grew up in Japan. My father was an engineer and he was transferred there. So I lived my formative years, 8 years old to 15, in a foreign country. At 15, we came back to the States. And my cultural bowl was quite unique to my peers, as I was now thrust into a little high school in Pascagoula, Mississippi, where any mention of Japan and people talked about the Japs, which is a very derogatory word when you're talking about Japanese. But I understood that because I'm back in a country that was not that far away from a war where the Japanese had brutally bombed Pearl Harbor. And yet I came from a 7-year experience of a very gracious people in a very beautiful country and very cordial people for me as a guest in their country. So my culture was quite different, and I had to be careful how I reacted. I was outnumbered, and each of us finds ourselves in that kind of diversity in our community and in our society. Cultural diversity is the existence of a variety of cultural or ethnic groups within a given setting or a given society. Now, as we're talking about cultural bowls, the United States has often been referred to as a melting pot, and that it's its cultural bowl. And a melting pot is what it referred to because generations of immigrants have come to this country and formed this country. And over time, they've melted together, and some have abandoned their own culture and their own uniqueness and become totally what we call assimilated into an American society. And that's why today, a lot of people disagree that the United States is a melting pot and that it's no longer appropriate for it to be a melting pot, that the United States really is a salad bowl and not a melting pot. It's a mixture, it's a tossed salad of a lot of different cultures and identities, each one not losing its own substance and identity, but being blended with all of the others. And so to view the United States as a melting pot or to view it as a salad bowl represents different cultural pictures or different cultural ideas. And it would be interesting to have a discussion about that as to which we view it. I've been in some groups where the arguments get rather heated about whether the United States should be a melting pot or whether it should be a salad bowl. That's a cultural diversity argument and dilemma. What are the pros and what are the cons of either of those? And maybe the argument is that one isn't right and the other wrong, that it's different. And those differences can be looked at and discussed. There are arguments that say our country should assimilate itself and become its own identity. And it is by now its own identity. And as people immigrate to this country, they should be prepared to assimilate. And then there's the other argument that says that's highly offensive to me. And that's disrespectful of my own background and my own culture, that surely there's room for my uniqueness in this country. And do I have to look like everyone in my neighborhood, or can I be honored and respected and allowed to exist? I don't know. What are your thoughts about that? For you, is this country, is it a melting pot? And should it be? Or is it a salad bowl? And we need to make sure it stays that way. Let's unmute and let's talk about that a little bit.
I sort of like a salad bowl. I'm hungry too, but yeah.
Well, historically, any nation who took on multiple cultures and multiple identities has failed. So we need to blend everything together to form our own if we're planning on sticking around this planet.
Well, I think that what's gone on in the last few days shows that we need to be blended rather than independent and individual, because people don't seem to know how to handle that.
Other comments?
Just always heard it as a melting pot. You know, since I was a little girl, that's what I heard, that it, you know, it's the melting pot. United States is the melting pot of all nationalities. So I don't know.
If you take a look over history, though, I mean, and we were when we first got started, but now, and when the immigrants came in, they wanted the American experience, so they wanted to assimilate into the society that they were moving into. They wanted to be part of that. We don't get that now. They come in now and they want their own neighborhood. They want their
Right.
own,
Yeah.
and that is one of the major problems that we're having, is creating the situation that we have now, in that there is a group of people that do not believe that there should be the Mexican flag flying, that we're not Mexico, we're the United States of America. Or they shouldn't be flying the Confederate flag. And there's those that want to get rid of history. And we have decided that identity is more important than unity. And they're going to fight for that identity, and until there's a change of thinking, and history proves this out, until there's a change in thinking, this country is on a path to failure. And this society is on a path to failure. Because every country that has embraced multiculturalism and let everybody have their own culture and their own language and all this has failed.
I don't think it has to be one or the other. I think all cultures have, you know, interesting facets to themselves, and I think it makes our country a more interesting place with lots of different cultures and lots of different ideas about things. And I think the rules should be the same for everyone. I mean, everyone should be treated equally. But I think it's great to keep your cultural identity.
I agree. I think you can have a little bit of it both ways. You can keep your traditions from whatever your ethnic background is, but you can still blend to what the American society has to offer. I think people need to loosen up a little bit on their sensitivities, you know, to do this. But I think you can have it both ways if you just respect each other.
Yeah.
I agree with Bob 100%.
Oh, the big word there was respect.
That's
That
true.
was the big word.
Okay, excellent.
I actually have a question
Okay,
or a thought. I'm probably one of the younger people in here, but my struggle, honestly, with all of this is that we were each born individuals. That's how, you know, God has made us. And what it boils down to me is, why can't we just respect and honor each person as their individual born self, instead of even worrying about labels or, you know, pointing fingers or questioning what someone else is doing, because not one of us is perfect. So why can't we focus on what we need to be doing and quit worrying about everybody else, what they're trying to present or not present? Because to me, that breeds intolerance, and intolerance then breeds hate. And I, you know, I'm all about loving people no matter what their nationality is, what their religious belief is, where they've come from. I have best friends from all over the world, and I love them all, and we all get along great. There's no fighting. I mean, we've all even been together on numerous occasions, and it's just amazing to see how no one judges one another. But yet, when you look at Americans are completely different from that, and I really think that that's sad. I just think we just need to just love one another for who we are and what we bring to the table, and just leave it at that, and quit worrying about what someone is or isn't doing.
So my niece is in law enforcement, and she recently posted on Facebook that she felt that the news media did a great disservice to our country when all of this happened with the death of the man due to corrupt policing. And so she said that the news was reporting that a white cop held down a black man. And she said the headline should have read, "A corrupt officer, regardless of black or white, held down a suspect." And so it would have, I don't think it would have incited as much hatred if we had looked at everybody as people, whether they were doing right or wrong. And so, I don't know, I just think that those words were very powerful.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to step in here. Excellent discussion, and we'll have time a little later for some more discussion. But I wanted to have this discussion for a while so that we could recognize that this is a question that doesn't have an answer. It's got biases. It depends on how we look at it. And you can build a case for either side. And that's cultural diversity, folks, that oftentimes you can build cases for either side, and there isn't necessarily an answer or a correct answer, but rather there are attitudes and there are values that I've heard respect, and I've heard honor, and I've heard don't get quite so upset about differences. And those are attitudes and so forth. And this discussion helps each of us visit our own bias. Because what you want to understand when we talk about cultural diversity is that we all have biases. A bias is not necessarily wrong. There are evil biases, but there's also very loving and nurturing biases. Biases are also how we've been taught, how we've grown up, what our mold is that we have grown up in. And so we have these ways of looking at things. So the key is not to eliminate biases, but to be willing to know what mine are and know which ones can get in the way if I'm not careful. And I want to be open to that and be able to see that bias and put a lid on it, or which biases are appropriate that I want to feel free to express, because that's how I see things. And that was the purpose of this discussion. We're talking about cultural diversity, which means that we have a society where it exists in that society a variety of cultural bowls that represent this community. There's also the term multiculturalism, and I heard somebody mention that. Multiculturalism is the presence of, but also the support for several distinct cultural biases or cultural groups within a given society. So we are a culturally diverse country and society. Our multiculturalism is our attitude toward how supportive are we of those different diverse ideas and thoughts and experiences and so on, and how sensitive to are we. For instance, in the children that you work with, do you take some time to think about what's this child's culture? What is this child's goal? And as I visit with this child, do I have a fairly good understanding of the picture that this child is coming out of? And how does that impact how I react or how other people react? There are some actions involved in multiculturalism. In fact, I've got 7 of them here in a list I want to share with you. And as I share things today too, make your own notes that are of interest to you, but don't worry about these categories because it's all written down. And if you like, I'll be happy to send this to Tim and the whole presentation, and he can send it on to you. So I've got the notes, so you don't have to worry about notes. I want you to sit here and assimilate, and I want you to sit here and just sort of process and see how some of these ideas resonate with you. Don't worry about remembering each point because you've got your cheat notes right here that you can would call the blader. So 7 actions that are involved in multiculturalism. One is the recognition that there are an abundance of diversities in our society, in our culture. Just simply to know that there's any number of different perspectives and bowls that are in our very community, that's even in my neighborhood, that's in my organization, that's in CASA as we work together. Number 2, to then have respect for those differences. Somebody mentioned respect, and then someone else, as soon as you mentioned it, went, here, here. Yes, respect. So to recognize that there is a diversity, and let's have some respect for that diversity, not resent it, even if some of the diversity is uncomfortable to me or seems to be inconvenience for me. Respect that. It's not up to me. Nobody died and left me in charge of this society, so I don't get to make all the calls. So let's have respect for those differences. Number 3, to acknowledge the validity of different expressions and contributions. So recognize, number 1, the diversity, have respect for that diversity, and then acknowledge that those different diversities have the right to express themselves and have thoughts and have contributions to this society. And then number 4, to actually value what different cultures have to offer. Not just, I know you're different and I respect that and you have a right to express yourself. I'm then called on to give some value, and that expression matters. That expression is important, and it's valid to you, so it's valuable in our society. Number 5, to therefore encourage the contribution of diverse groups and sensitivities. So now it's recognize the diversity, respect the diversity, acknowledge the validity of that diversity, value what the diversity has to offer, and then actually encourage that diversity to speak up and offer what they have to offer. You see the progression here? And then number 6, this is the toughest one for me, to empower myself and to empower other people to strengthen themselves, get this, by being critical of your own bias. If I am willing to acknowledge my own bias, my own prejudices, I'm a stronger person if I acknowledge that than if I try to deny it or even get rid of it or try to pretend it's not there. Our strength is in acknowledging I do have biases and I do have prejudices, and therefore I want to find them. I don't want to hide them. I don't want to hide them from others. I want to be I want to be addressed by others. I want others to confront my own biases and tell me, I think you're being prejudiced here, so that I can look at it and instead of getting angry and tell them to just go get lost, say, wow, you know what? You might be right. Thank you very much for that, because I don't want to be prejudiced. So if you can help me find it, I'll work around it too. That's number 6. And then finally, number 7 is to celebrate rather than just tolerate the differences in our society. So now we recognize the diversity, we respect the differences, we acknowledge the validity of those differences, we value what those differences have to offer, and then we even encourage people to express those differences. I empower myself by being able to recognize my own biases, and then I celebrate the whole thing. Hot dog, it's good that there's differences. It's good that there's a diversity, because it keeps us educated, it keeps us honest, it keeps us open. When I grew up in Japan as a kid, I went to a Canadian school. The school spoke English. It was a Canadian missionary school. 212 students from kindergarten to 12th grade. It was a small school, but 28 different nationalities were represented in that school. Children from all over the world were attending that school. That was a cultural diversity that every day was celebrated. Nobody was resentful. We were all foreigners in that school. We were the guests. And fortunately, the Japanese were very cordial hosts and hostesses. But it's to be able to recognize the value of that diversity, to be able to hear thoughts and ideas and traditions or points of view from people that I could never have that point of view. I just haven't had that experience. So those are the 7 actions involved in multiculturalism. So then the next list of things is, if we acknowledge that's important, then how can each of us support multiculturalism and support cultural diversity? What role can I play in cultural diversity? And I've got a list of a few things I want to throw out to you, see what you think. One is to increase your own level of understanding of other cultures. Be willing to learn about them. Be curious, in other words, as you're working with people, as you're working with some children, be interested and curious in their cultural bowl, in their perspectives and their experiences. Become the student. Let people teach you about them, rather than try to figure out who they are or decide who you think they should be. Be willing to learn and be willing to listen and be willing to try to understand what is driving this person's decisions and emotions and reactions. Another way to support cultural diversity is to avoid imposing our own values on others. Now, let me be very clear here. We have every right and we should share our values. I'm not saying keep your values to yourself. I'm saying, because you're part of the cultural diversity, I'm saying honor and acknowledge and share your values, but stop short of imposing those values on other people, but share them out there as another consideration, as another way of looking at things. And you can teach people with that. You can teach children, you can teach adults. Let me suggest another way to look at this. You can tell someone, instead of, you need to look at it like this. You see the difference? You need to understand this. Or let me show you another possible way to look at this or to understand this. Have that kind of discussion. Another way you can support cultural diversity is to always recognize that if somebody is not proficient in the English language, if they're from somewhere else, that is not an indication of their level of intelligence. They may sound unintelligent because they don't know the language, but it has nothing to do with their level of intelligence. Where we have to be careful in terms of biases, if we see people who are not as proficient, say, in our language, or as I'm working at Gulf Bend with the mentally ill, as I see people who are not all that proficient in maturity or proficient in the ability to use the prefrontal cortex and make good judgment, that is not a reflection of their level of intelligence and ability to understand things. And it's very easy, certainly in my field, to think that I'm working with a bunch of idiots. But that's only the staff I'm working with. It's not the customers that we're working with. But most of it is because there's a lack of understanding. There isn't the cultural understanding. So as you work with people who are stumbling over words and how to express themselves, avoid thinking, well, they're not too bright, I better be pretty primitive with them. But you don't know that, and you don't have enough information yet. Another way to support cultural diversity is to recognize that concepts such as family, gender roles, spirituality, and even emotional well-being differs among cultures. The word family means different things to different cultures. Gender roles are different from culture to culture. What may be appropriate for one gender in one culture is considered out of the norm or inappropriate in another culture. And one's not right or wrong, it's different. I know, again, back growing up in Japan, men were much more dominant in that society than we were accustomed to in the United States. And we had to understand that. And women were treated differently. Not adversely, by the way, but there was a dominance. I can't tell you how many times I would see a gentleman, a businessman, business suit, and it's a drizzly morning, on his way to the bus stop to go to work, and his wife is running along behind holding the umbrella over his head. And I'm appalled. What a jerk. You know, she's your wife. You should be holding it for her. But it was very appropriate in that size. So be aware that concepts such as family and spirituality and emotional well-being may be different in other cultures. So if you're talking to someone about, I just want you to be well, do you know whether or not they know what you're talking about? And you may have to pursue that. What do you think I'm saying? Or what does being well mean to you? Another thing to be aware of is to certainly advocate for materials that are representative of various cultures. Now, we see that a lot, certainly in our society. When there's literature, we try to make sure the literature is in other languages, certainly in Spanish, although sometimes that becomes a point of resentment for some of us. I know I bought something the other day. It came in the mail, and there was an instruction sheet, and the instruction sheet had about a dozen different languages, but it didn't have English. The entire instruction sheet was written in different cultural languages except mine, and it was in my country. And I was a little offended by that. And then I thought, well, Lane, now you know maybe what it feels like for others. Do you get offended, or do you decide just not to get upset? Figure it out. Put the thing together. But we can be sensitive if we're working with someone that do they have materials, or do they have what they need, and is it in a cultural bias that they can understand? Or am I going to have to help them, hand them something in English? And not only, they might be able to read English and understand English, but the meanings of some of those words may not be accurate for them. And you may have to help them understand those words. And that doesn't mean that they're unintelligent and have a poor vocabulary. It means their cultural bowl is different, and the language may be different. Also, to support multiculturalism, you want to be willing to intervene when you see something going on in such a manner that it seems to be insensitive, or it seems to be an inappropriate bias or prejudice towards someone else. We have to advocate for some people that are not being taken seriously or not being respected. If we see evidence of cultural biases, we have to speak up. As I walk about the building at Gulf Bend Center, if I see evidence of that or of some prejudice, it is my responsibility to lean into that and to speak up and to try to do something, not just walk away and say, that's deplorable, somebody ought to do something. But you be the one who does something. And then finally, be proactive in listening, accepting, and welcoming ideas, thoughts, and people who are different from you. Be open to differences rather than just uncomfortable and maybe lean back and walk away, but sort of lean into differences and be open to that in terms of, whoa, that's weird to me. Help me understand what's going on here. And here, This one, I'm going to put it in this category. It's a little different, but to me, it's critically important. Don't assume somebody agrees with you if they say they do, because you don't know what cultural bowl is driving that answer. They may be saying it out of respect. I'm not ever supposed to disagree with you or with my elders. So yeah, I agree. They may be afraid to disagree. Some of their background or bias may have been that they were punished if they disagreed or if they had a thought of their own. So a lot of times if you say, well, do you understand this? Yes, I do. And they don't. And for you to figure out a way to not stop at that answer, but sort of flesh it out in a way that's respectful. Just, do you understand it? Just, are you sure you understand it? Or may I ask them, then repeat back in your own words how you understand this. And if they seem embarrassed, say, look, I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I want to make sure you truly understand it. And I don't want you to say yes just because you feel it's safer for you to say yes. Do you understand? I'm here to help you understand this. So please tell me what you think you understand. So also, explore people's history when they're talking to you or telling you if they agree or if they understand. Explore, sort of ask yourself, don't settle for just their words. What is this person's background? What is this child's history? Can I count on these words being accurate, or have they learned to say these words because it's safer than not saying these words? We don't know this. We don't know the experiences of people. And to me, that's the most important part of multiculturalism, is for me to be aware that I've got to find out what's driving what these people are saying to me and how they are reacting to me. And I also have to make sure that they understand that I really am an advocate for them and I'm on their side. And I want them to understand. I'm not trying to get them to do something. I'm trying to understand what you need and what you need to do and how can I help you do that. Does that make sense? Okay, now I'm going to shift gears here a little bit. And again, if you have comments or something, just wait, and we can have question answer at the end. But I'm going to take a left turn here and talk to you about what I believe to be the new cultural diversity, and that's trauma-informed care. The ability to understand that probably the vast majority of the people we bump up against have experienced trauma of some sort and don't know what to do with that. And that trauma is driving their reactions and driving their life. All agencies now are building into them, and Gulf Bend is in the middle of it, is building into its culture and building into its policies trauma-informed concepts and trauma-informed policies and categories and understandings. If we're going to be culturally sensitive and culturally diverse, we must now recognize that one of the cultural variables is trauma history. And therefore, being able to relate to people in a way that's informed about that and is sensitive to that trauma history. And I don't mean coddle people. I don't mean feel sorry for people. I mean to be sensitive to what this person's life may look like and picture may look and how they are reacting to things. Trauma is any event beyond a person's ability to master it at the time. They may be able to master it at a different time, but at that point in time, any event at that moment beyond that person's ability to manage it at that time. So you can see, therefore, why almost anything can be trauma. And the first thing in trauma-informed care is to set aside any judgment about, oh, that's not a big deal. Why are you so upset about that? Because we don't know, because trauma has to do with the experience the person is having and whether that experience is frightening, threatening, scary to them at the time. It may not be scary to me or to someone else, but is it scary or threatening to them at that time based on how they perceive things? Trauma events, of course, are history. They're etched in stone. We don't get rid of them. We don't change them. And it's not really that trauma event that's the problem. It's the scar from that trauma event that's the problem. It's the impact of that event and the impression in that person's life that that event has left. And while in you being trauma informed, you can't do anything about the event, you can't change it, you can't eradicate it, but your attitude and your presence with someone has everything to do with the scar. You impact the degree of that scar at that moment, not the event itself. So you want to be careful not to get bogged down into learning about the event or understanding this poor person 15 years ago, this happened. Okay, but what's the impact? What's the scar? Forget the event. But I'm not discrediting the event, but what's the scar that this person's carrying around? And how can I, with my own presence and my own attitude, help soothe that scar? So I'm going to give you some things to consider for that. And these, please, it's all written right here. So you don't have to remember, just listen to it. In trauma, you've got what I call 3 E's. And E number 1 is the event. The event is what happened to this person. And it's traumatic to them based on their experience with that. That's the second E. You've got the event, you've got the experience the person had, and it can be quite different. I worked with a woman years and years ago who had a small fender bender accident. And she had some post-trauma experiences from that and was unable to get to work, couldn't get out of the house, had to medical leave from work, and nobody was honoring that or appreciating. It was a fender bender, for gosh sake. Somebody bumped her from behind, hardly even damaged the cars. There was no injuries, and nobody got it. And she ended up in my office in therapy. And here's what happened, folks. Somebody bumped her just hard enough to engage the airbag. So the airbag opened up. You know, those airbags have powder or smoke, and so there was powder from the airbag that started wafting in the car. She thought it was a fire. And so she went to get out of the car, but it had bumped her just enough that it jammed the front door and she couldn't get the door open. And she truly believed she was going to burn alive. It was a terrorizing experience for her. A fender bender to everybody else, but a terrorizing experience to her. It took her a year to be able to get back to work. And until people appreciated what her experience was, not the event was minimal, but her experience made her, oh, well, no wonder, of course. You know, if we're at a moment in our life where I truly fear at that moment that my life is at risk and I'm probably going to die, whether it's real or accurate or not, if that's my reality, that's a traumatic event. And it shakes the foundations. So the experience that that person has in that event is more important than the event itself. That's the second E. And then the third E is the effect of that experience after the fact, long lasting. Do I now have sensitivities that I didn't used to have? Do I now have certain triggers in my life when things happen? If it looks like, sounds like, smells like, oh my gosh, it is. And here it is happening again. And it isn't. But in my computer, I'm reliving the whole thing, and it's as though it's actually real. That's trauma. And so for us to be aware of that, and when someone starts having some triggers, or when someone starts having difficulty, to not question whether this is reasonable or valid or not, but to try to understand what's feeding that. So the most important attitudinal shift when we build trauma-informed care into our cultural multiculturalism diversity. See how I get all those words? Am I brilliant or what? The most important attitudinal shift is to shift away from asking what's wrong with you to what happened to you. To be able to respect that however this person's reacting, this is probably not pathology in them. Are they nuts? Are they, or whatever? It may be a result of experiences they've had. So the question is not what's wrong with you here. The question is what happened to you? And let someone start talking about their story and what happened to them. And I guarantee you, if they feel safe enough to talk to you about what happened, you'll go there and go, oh, no wonder, I get it. Of course you're reacting this way. It makes perfect sense to me, naturally. That's trauma-informed care. To be able to recognize that trauma experiences is a part of our cultural bowl that we are living in. So, there are also 4 R's to a trauma-informed approach to people. The first one is to realize that there can be a widespread impact and there are paths for recovery for people. To realize that the impact can be broad, but there is a way through it. Anyway, the second R is to be able to recognize signs and symptoms. So to Google trauma-informed care or Google signs and symptoms and start educating yourself. What are some things I can see that is keying to me? Not, what's wrong with this person today, but oh wow, those may be some trauma triggers. They may be reliving some trauma in their life. Let me sort of flesh that out, or let me be sensitive to that and ask them, well, what happened to you? And see if they're willing to tell the story. And then also, trauma-informed care is to respond to these different signs and symptoms by integrating knowledge into our own personal policies and our own organizational policies. At Gulf Bend, we are building a whole new set of policies that integrates the awareness that probably, if not 100, 98% of the people who walk into our doors have had trauma in their life somewhere. So all of our policies now are wrapping themselves around that so that we are a trauma-informed caring organization. But I'm also here to tell you that we all have personal policies. And how do I build into my personal policies, how I live my life, a trauma-informed awareness and sensitivity and care to people? To realize, and not overread it, but to realize, even as I walk down the street, a majority of the people I see and acknowledge and walk past have probably had some sort of trauma in their life without the ability to understand it or to talk about it. And then, of course, we need to build in ideas and policies that resists re-traumatizing people. What we're doing at Gulf Bend is we are now working, and we've had some people who work here who are courageous enough to acknowledge, I've had trauma in my life. Good, thank you very much. We want you to go outside the building, turn around and walk in. We want you to come in the waiting room, and we're going to lead you through our processes. And what I want you to do is I want you to pick out anything that re-traumatizes you. Is it pictures on the wall? Is it colors? Where are the triggers that I don't even know what they are, because that's not my experience. We want to build in an awareness, not only organization, but even personally, what are things I'm doing or not doing that may be re-traumatizing people unintentionally? And in order to do that, of course, we have got to be willing to honor people's trauma and not question, they're carrying this too far, they're working me here, it's oversensitivity. I'm not talking about coddling. I'm talking about being aware of and sensitive to. And that's the delicate balance. One of the struggles we're having at Gulf Bend as we reframe this place is, how do we know if we're going too far and now we're pandering and coddling and that we're oversensitive? You know, and that, I don't know the answer to that, but it's an important question to be asking ourselves. That it's the same way with the melting pot and the salad bowl. Each of us may fall on one side or the other, but probably the best answer is, what's the blend between those two? We need some assimilation into this culture, which is an American culture, but at the same time, not totally ignore or lose the richness of the culture that came in here to become a part of this. So we want some salad mixed into this mixing bowl. It's always a balance. And with trauma-informed care, that question is always there. Where am I? Am I too far here? Am I too far there? That balance is a very active activity. There's nothing static about balance. Because if you watch a tightrope walker, that tightrope walker is never standing still. They are constantly moving to keep the balance. And the only way you have balance is to get a little off balance to know what that is. So then you know what balance is. If you ever have to focus binoculars, you really don't know what focused is until you get it unfocused. Okay, I know that's not focused. And it's all in relation to, in perspective. So each of our own personal trauma-informed policy and care is something that's constantly moving and balancing. So if somebody points out to me that I'm being insensitive or that I'm being prejudiced, my response is not get lost. I'm doing the best I can. My response is thank you. I need to know that. I appreciate that. And to make adjustments and make changes. Okay, those are the 4 R's. And now finally, there's some principles. There's 6 core principles with trauma-informed care. And again, these principles are for organizations, for CASA, and to train volunteers, but these are also each of our personal principles. What is Lane Johnson organization policies doing about this? And the first one is safety. When you're dealing with people who experience trauma, safety is the most important category, because trauma is about not being safe. Trauma is about being in danger, being helpless, being out of control, having things happen of which I have no choice in making it stop or helping it go on. So it's always about safety. Do people feel safe with me? Am I carrying myself in such a way that people pretty quickly feel safe with me? How do I act and look and behave as though I am a safe person to be around? And that's a question that each of us has to answer. The second one is trustworthiness and transparency. And that drives our decisions. In other words, am I making decisions or doing things? Am I keeping my word? Or am I demonstrating in my behavior that I really do honor and respect safety? And if someone says they're not feeling safe, do I stop and say, oh, okay, what can we do? You know, if in marriages, you know, if my wife Phoenix comes to me one day and says, Lane, I'm not happy about this. And it doesn't matter if I'm elated about it or not. It may be something I love, but if Phoenix isn't happy, then sooner or later, neither am I going to be, because we're in it together. And in our society, we're all in it together. So if someone comes to me and says, I don't feel safe, I better pay attention to that. Because if I don't, that's eventually going to cost all of us, this person who doesn't feel safe. So if a child comes to you and says, this doesn't feel safe, you don't say, oh, it's nothing, get over it, it's just a little this, quit being such a kid. You know, if I don't feel safe, you stop. You kneel down at their level. Okay, what do you need to feel safe right now? What do you need? And what is it about this that doesn't feel safe? How can we reframe this in your head so that you understand that this isn't dangerous today? It might have been dangerous 5 years ago. It's not dangerous today. Have those discussions with people. Help them work through it. Peer support is an important component to trauma-informed care. For people to be able to identify with other people who know exactly what they're talking about, who know exactly what their experiences are. We're learning at Gulf Bend. We have, for the last 3 or 4 years, we've been using peers, not just with trauma, but when we use peers here, it means we are using individuals who have a mental illness, who have their own diagnosis, who have suffered with mental illness. And I'm here to tell you, our peers are having a greater effect on our customers than our highly trained case managers and counselors, because they're peers. They automatically have credibility with people because they do know exactly what you're talking about. Been there, done that, had that experience. But they also represent where you can get to. I got here, so can you. So peers are an extremely important component. So if you are working with people who have trauma in their life, but they're getting to a nice, healthy place about it, capitalize on that. Use those people. Let them be a resource and an advocacy for you to help others get there also. Another is collaboration. Be willing to collaborate with people. This not only goes with trauma-informed care, but it also goes with cultural diversity. Collaboration means that the power differences are leveled. Because collaboration means, okay, what's going on? What do you want? How do we work together? How can we find a middle ground? You know that dirty word, compromising? Well, folks, I'm here to tell you that that's a cultural bias if we believe compromising is a sign of weakness. Because compromising is collaboration. Compromising is recognizing, you know, I don't get to have it all my way. And I've got to figure out what other different needs and expectations are, and how can we find this blend? How can we find this salad bowl that accommodates different things? What is the win-win alternative where everybody recognizes it's not exactly what I want, but this will work. I understand I can't have it the way I want, but this is reasonable, and this is what I want. That's collaboration. Collaboration also means that we can't get things done we want to by ourselves. We have got to have teamwork. We have got to have people with other skills and other resources and other concepts blend in with us and hitch up with us and help us do these things. No one organization can get done what they need to get done anymore in a vacuum. All of us as organizations must get over our turf battles and blend with each other and collaborate. And I don't mean by that we all get rid of our executive directors and have a single leader, but I mean we learn that the people I work with as a mental health organization, this isn't my territory. This is my responsibility. And if someone, you know, is doing things that we also do, that's not a competitor, that's a partner, and that's a collaborator in this business. Empowerment is important, and we empower people by recognizing the strengths that they have and capitalizing on those strengths. We empower people by being influenced by them. What better way to feel like I have some leverage and I have some power if it makes a difference what I think, or if someone is actually influenced by me. When you're working with kids, if you want the child to feel safe and feel empowered, look for a way to have your mind change by something they think or say. Look, don't make it up. You got to be honest. Be trustworthy. Don't patronize. But look for an opportunity for that child to have a perspective or way of looking at things where you go, whoa, now that makes sense. I hadn't thought of that. Thank you. Let's do it that way. Be influenced by that individual. You have just validated them and you have just empowered them to believe it matters what I think. My point of view is important to some people. And then finally, another important principle is to have your own humility to be able to recognize your own prejudices and your own biases and be able to be responsive to people who may experience that or point that out, to be responsive to them in a grateful and a gratitudinal and in a collaborative way. Thank you very much. I think you're exactly right. That did not come out right, did it? And that is a prejudice of mine. That's kind of my background. And you've just raised my awareness. I appreciate it. How can we do this differently? So to get our ego out of the mix and to be humble enough to realize I'm just as capable of anyone else of being a little narrow-minded sometimes, and can be grateful when that's pointed out and not offended or not defensive, but to be able to laugh at myself and go, my gosh, can you believe, look what I just did. Can you believe it? Somebody once said, we never truly mature until we have our first good laugh at ourselves, and that how human we can be, and that we don't always have it right. So that's cultural diversity. You may have gotten more than what you asked for, but I did want to bring in trauma-informed care because it's critically important, and it is out there. And most of the kids you're working with have had trauma in their life, and they need to be able to honor that and recognize that. So if you can be a little savvy and open to that and let them know, man, they're going to bend your ear, I guarantee you. Okay, I'm going to shut up. Any questions, any comments or reactions?
That was amazing.
Cool.
Absolutely. Wow. Yeah, it was really, I feel like I needed that.
Good. You want the Cliff Notes?
Yes, I do.
I know we'll share those as soon as we receive them.
Okay.
Yeah, those are some great points. And trauma-informed care is something I'm always interested in, because all the children we work with have been traumatized by their removal from their homes.
Right.
And the things that went on there.
Yeah.
Anybody have questions? Oh, let's see. And Regina said, maybe we can put a link into our newsletter on Friday.
Tim,
Yes.
this is Bobby.
Hey, Bobby.
I wanted to tell Lane that when he spoke to us 2 months ago about making contact with our old friends when this pandemic first started, I did exactly that. I called 9 of my high school graduating classes. They lived in 5 different states, and we connected. It was a